right. Welcome everyone to our creator session, VSCO's creator session. I'm going to be one of the co-hosts today. My name is Kyle Hale, and I work on VSCO's customer and community success team, where we help people learn about the app. Anybody that has support or technical questions that write in, our team answers those questions. And I also help Maya host these awesome creator sessions. So today we have joining us, we have Reggie Ballesteros, who is a very accomplished wedding photographer and a very good online educator. So I will pass it over to Maya to intro herself.
Hi, everyone. Like Kyle mentioned, my name is Maya. I am our community manager on the customer and community success team. Happy to have you all here today and excited to introduce someone very special here in the VSCO community who is here to educate you all today. So without further ado, hi, Reggie. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Kyle. Thanks, Maya. So, for those who don't know me, my name is Reggie Ballesteros, and I actually used to be an engineer, and I turned into a wedding photographer. I'm also a Fujifilm ambassador, and I create educational photography content on YouTube and on Instagram. I'm based here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and my passion really is teaching photography to people at all skill levels. And my mission right now is to teach 1 million people to become photographers through the power of like the internet. So when Maya and Kai approached me to teach on behalf of VSCO for this creator session, I was really excited to be able to teach and share what my creative process is, especially when it comes to finding endless inspiration, because I think this is a big promise, right, that I'm going to have to kind of upkeep. So before we get into that, I wanted to ask you all a question. If you could go to the next slide. What stops you from creating every day through photography? I want you to share in the chat. You can have a short answer, long answer, but what is the thing that's stopping you from creating every day? Lack of ideas, perfectionism. Too critical of my work, resources, everyday inconveniences, work obligations. I don't want to leave the house. Job, family, time. Yep. Procrastination. Mental walls. There's a lot of answers. A busy schedule, lack of aesthetics in my city. Yep. Shyness, work and family, obligations. Awesome. Too many ideas. So I'm hoping that I can help all of you kind of overcome these things so that you can take more photographs and be able to create more every single day. In my journey as a photography educator, I've noticed that the most common blocker, there's a lot of different things that you all shared, but the most common blocker is this sense of lack of inspiration to take action, right? Many people feel like they don't have an interesting enough subject or place, or they don't feel inspired to document their life. My life is not inspiring enough to share with the internet. Like that's something from social media, or the feed has programmed us to feel like our lives are not like cool enough, inspirational enough to create, document, and share it with the rest of the world. But the truth is, inspiration can come in all forms, and it really is indeed endless if you take the approach that I take, because I'm creating photos everywhere that I am, and I'm at least mentally banking them if I don't have a camera. So today I'm going to teach you all how to develop the habit of creating every day by finding beauty in the ordinary. You don't have to travel to an amazing location to create compelling images, because light is everywhere, lines and shapes are everywhere. And through this, amazing power of photography, we're actually able to create literally everywhere that we are, even if you don't have an expensive camera at your disposal. So in the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about inspiration. I think that we have to really dig into this to understand how we can start taking more photographs, start taking action. Usually people think about it in this linear sense that inspiration leads to motivation, motivation leads to action, right? Most people will only commit to an action if they have a certain level of motivation to get them to do it. And then you don't even have that motivation unless you have some emotional inspiration to kind of spark everything together. But the truth is, action isn't just the effect of inspiration, but it actually can be the cause of it. And your actions can create emotional reactions and inspiration, and then those kind of reactions and inspirations can move you to motivate further actions to take. So think about it in the photography sense. You take a photo, you either like it, don't like it, or you really love it, right? Those will create different actions. You can learn how to do it better. You can, some people may just stop, right? That's one of the downsides. Or you can keep chasing that same type of photo that you did and keep making more of them. But the act of taking that photo has created some type of reaction. And we need to take advantage of this perspective. And you can actually reorient your mindset and acknowledge that it's a loop. So if we take an action that leads to inspiration, and that inspiration leads us to motivate us to take another action, and it just keeps going and going and going. So instead of waiting for inspiration to strike, you just have to find a way for you to act all the time, without any real consequence other than the fact that you will get some inspiration to go in one direction or another, and that leads to motivating you to do something else. And as a wedding photographer, that's something that I had a lot of practice in, because I had to, if you see in this next slide, create in these kind of like unideal, uninspiring conditions. Usually at the beginning of the day is usually the most challenging. I have to go into this random rented room in an Airbnb or hotel room. Doesn't have a ton of light, doesn't have cool furniture, isn't like a palace or anything. Usually it's just, a very simple room. The furniture is never super cool. There's a garbage can in the right hand side of this room. So I've started to understand that there's these different patterns and compositions that happen within these environments, specific lighting situations, over the 8 years of photographing weddings, and that I can use these to kind of be able to create and make myself create photos that will end up inspiring me to take more photos within these like uninspiring situations. And over time, I realized that these same scenarios actually transfer over to everyday life very easily. So in this next slide, you'll see that a very similar photo. So this photo is two grooms getting ready. There's a backlit situation with a large window. And then when you underexpose the image, it's going to create a frame, right? And also some texture and all the surrounding elements. And this is two grooms getting ready on their wedding day, the biggest day of their life, at least up to this point. And on the right hand side are my kids doing another day of just, watching the show they like on TV. This is an everyday occurrence. If you have kids, you probably have this happen too. So it's nothing spectacular or notable, but I created the same type of photo using the same type of elements because the same lighting and composition existed. A big window in the back, underexposed, and I have the framing. Another type of situation that may happen is for wedding photographers especially is being in a challenging low light situation. So that happens when you go to these church weddings. So in this next slide, you'll see a very low light, dingy church. Lighting coming from nasty ambient like fixtures, as well as like these windows from the side. Nothing is going to be flattering enough to take a portrait of somebody within this church. But I had to, as a wedding photographer, I had to figure out where the cool angle is going to be, where I can make something inspiring. And I've noticed that in these churches, when you shoot straight down the aisle and get low, you can create these leading lines that makes a very interesting photo of this very poorly lit situation. And how do we transfer that to everyday life, right? And I realized that it's an aisle. These aisles are everywhere. You have aisles down your house in terms of a hallway, or if you look at the next slide, you can have literally an aisle in a store, or in this case, a grocery store. It's the exact same composition, exact same kind of lighting setup coming from overhead, and you have the leading lines coming from the outskirts to go toward the center. And one side you have a bride coming down the aisle, and the other one is my wife going down the aisle to find something for a recipe. But it is an interesting photo, right? Of a very ordinary everyday occurrence. And I think the power and understanding is you can break down everything in terms of lighting and lines and realize that I can go from a wedding photography situation and transfer that to everyday life. But at the same time, when I'm off of work, I'm photographing every single day. I'm using the same creative muscles and same systems to create photos that I can still come back to the next wedding that I go to and be fresh. So I think the one thing too is I've also had instances where I try different photos in an everyday situation, an experiment, and then I try them out after I kind of tested them in an actual professional situation. So it doesn't only just go from the professional sense to the everyday, but it feeds back and forth. And if you're not a professional photographer, then you just have one kind of area that you're playing with, but you can apply this approach to every facet of your life. And I think that is hopefully what I can demo for you today. So
Reggie, I had a question for you. When did you decide that you were professional? I know that that's kind of a question I hear with a lot of
totally, yeah.
beginners or people that are just getting started. They're like, I don't know if I'm professional or not.
Yeah, so I think there's two ways to think about it. Some people think it's professional in terms of skill, and there's other people who are professional in terms of like the actual occupation and revenue driving of a business. The way that I define professional tends to be just on the business side. I think you can have someone who's very, very skilled, but doesn't work with clients or anything like that and just creates for themselves. There can be a skilled photographer, but I wouldn't call them professional because I think there's like the business sense of it. And you can also have someone who's not so skilled at photography, but a professional photographer in the sense that they created a photography business, have a good revenue stream going. So that's kind of where I come down to it. I think there's also the side of like confidence level, right? I think that's where most people are hitting on. When am I a professional? I want to say you will never be ready. You will never be ready to do what you want to do. Like I still get nervous before every wedding I photograph. It has never went away. So if you're thinking that one day it's going to go away, at least for me it hasn't. And I just consider that the nerves and that feeling, it just means that I care about what I'm doing. So um, that was kind of a roundabout answer, but I think it kind of hit different facets of what it means to be a professional. Next thing that we want to talk about is I found that a lot of people, in addition to not being inspired by their surroundings, they're not inspired by their gear. They want better gear. I need this. I need that. I can't make cool photos unless I have this. And I think the highest kind of like tier right now that's very popular on the internet and everywhere in the photography landscape is film photography. Everyone's getting back into it, right? Um, the analog feel, the intentionality, like being able to hold and touch it and not see what you're going to take is really inspiring to a lot of people right now. And this is where I have a little quiz for you. So one of these photos was taken with my iPhone, an iPhone 11 Pro, not the newest iPhone with all the fanciest stuff right now, just the iPhone 11. And then the other one was taken with a $1,044 camera, a film photography camera, 35 millimeter, and Kodak Portra 400 and 35 millimeter, which is $30 a pop now. You can't find it. Everyone's buying it up. And then I developed and scanned it at a professional lab. Which one do you think is film? I think Maya already set up a poll, number one or number two. And if you want to actually say like why you think it's one or two, let us know.
So we have 44% of you voted on the image on the left one, and 56 of you, or 56% of you voted on the image on the right, number two.
So 56 said two is film. So, yay. Number two is actually an iPhone with edited with VSCO Film X presets. So if that doesn't tell you that it's not really the medium that's at play, it's about the composition and lighting, I don't think I know what else will tell you. And if we go to the next slide, I can show you what I started with and then what I ended up with. And I think the cool thing too is, and I think Jocelyn says the shadows are the really one that's telling it. It really can be modulated too, because I actually kind of like edited it to be flawed. And I think someone said there's a bit more distortion. In an ideal sense, both photos are taken with the iPhone main camera, and this other camera is a 28 millimeter, which is a similar focal length, but I think the distortion will be a little bit different. But now I'm going to take you all to a demo to kind of walk you through how I edited this specific photo. So the first thing I do after I load the photo into VSCO is I'm going to look for my presets, and I think I love getting the option of different film presets to use. My main ones that I go to tend to be the Kodak Portra ones or the Ilford IH5 for the black and white. So I'm just right here. I'm going to do the Kodak Portra 400 because the other photo that I took was also Kodak Portra 400. And once you start off, these are the main three things that get the biggest impact. So you have the strength, you can dial it 0 or 12. And then, so that's kind of how you modulate how much it's going to be. And then character is going to really give you the kind of like the contrast or the fade of the photo, how old it looks or how like push process it looks. And here I'm going to bring this around to like 3 points right here. And then the warmth, I'm just going to increase it just a touch. Probably like right here. And then now this takes you to kind of like the basic adjustments, similar to any other editing software that you've seen. But the cool thing is we have all those tools in just right on our app. So I love editing with VSCO because it makes it super easy to navigate all the different tools, and it has pretty much every single tool that on the bigger softwares on the PC and the Mac, you have them here too. So we're gonna dial in the exposure down, and then I'm going to just increase the tint just a little bit. And a lot of these adjustments that I'm making is to make it similar to the scan that I had. So I'm trying to chase different tones and gradations based on the scan. And then you can always save it as a preset for later and then put it on a different photo that you don't have a scan reference for. So now I'm going to just bring down the saturation a little bit because it's a little too strong. And then I think the biggest pro tip that I have for you is in order to get the film looks, you really have to dial down into the split tone and the highlights and shadows and the hue, saturation, lightness. So first we're going to go into split tones, and the scan that I had a lot of green in the shadows. So I'm going to go to the green, and this is a little too much. I'm going to bring it down to like here, and you can see like that green in the little cave looking thing. We're going to bring it down, say like 2.4. And now I'm going to tackle editing the sky because it is a little bit too blue. I've noticed that Portrait 400, when it's bright outside, it kind of makes it go toward more white unless you're underexposing. So I'm going to just bring the saturation down a good amount. And then we're going to just brighten it up a little bit to take it more to the like pastel look right there. And then we're going to round it off with just like adding a touch of clarity to like the detail here, some sharpness. Cool.
Reggie, it's interesting that you're not applying much of the sharpness or clarity. Is there a reason for that?
I don't like to over sharpen anything. I'm just looking at the little kind of like cracks in the rock, and that's pretty much how I did. Like that's my kind of my approach to everything. And also with film, the clarity is not ever gonna be super clear because of the grain, and that's why I'm gonna kind of round out this edit with the grain. And from my observation, like around 2.2 for this KP4 preset is a good representation of the grain for like a well exposed image. So, and that's kind of the final image here, and we can go before, after. So really shows up like a phone photo. I think a phone photo always has very saturated skies for some reason. That's how they design the phones. And then we have a film photo or a film lookalike photo. And I think the cool thing that I want to share with everyone is that what if you don't have enough money to get into film photography? Well, you can try out different films, right, on VSCO and test out to see if you like it and try it out with your phone. So there isn't too much risk that you have to do to try out these different looks, and then it may influence which films you try out first. So that's something cool to do as well.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know or new to VSCO or not really sure what the difference between the filter or the presets are, FilmX presets are modeled after actual film. So what we did was we designed this system that we would go out and shoot a film stock, say, Portrait 400, and then we would scan it we would shoot light through it, and then the light was captured on the other end with a device called a spectrometer. And so all the different dyes and colors that you would see in an actual film emulsion, like if you held up a negative to the light, that machine, the spectrometer, is actually capturing all of that data, and then we'll turn it into a model, and then that'll get put into the VSCO app. So it's about as accurate and like a true representation of film that you can get in digital, which is really neat. And then Maya shared here in the chat, if you want to read more about it, you can go and check that out. So yeah, so that's, we tried to do a really good job of making it a very one-to-one comparison between the film and the digital.
So I'm hoping that this demo shows you really that the gear is secondary to lighting and composition. Like you really have to hone in on the lighting and the composition to be able to create the biggest impact with the photos. And I think in order to hone in on lighting composition, you really want to make these actions simple for you so that you keep taking action, keep getting inspired and learning. So pick a simple Pick a camera that you like to use, or remember that you always have one in your pocket, and let's minimize the creative decisions that we're making and focus specifically on observing, looking for those light and lines. And now that's where I'm going to kind of lead into the tips for the light and lines challenge that we had specifically associated with this creator session. So the first tip is really honing in on directional light. And that means identifying the light sources in your environment and noting the direction that it's coming from. So you notice how the texture of your subject and the overall contrast of your image will change as you vary the angle of light in relation to your subject and your camera's perspective. So this first situation here is a side lighting situation. In the next slide. And I have a little lighting diagram to show you kind of like a breakdown of like how the lighting is working. It's basically lighting coming through a car window and lighting my wife and kids eating ice cream after we went to the pumpkin patch to get pumpkins. But in this scenario, we're just inside a car. This is something that will happen to many of you, just riding in a car or, you know, hanging out in a car. And it creates a very dramatic look to the photo, because I think with side lighting, you get a lot of drama, you get a lot of texture. You can see texture in their clothes, highlights the profile of their face, especially if they're looking into the light. So I think that's a cool combination is when you are shooting perpendicular to where the lighting is coming from, that's where side lighting really brings out that texture. And then when it comes to portraits, my preferred way of shooting portraits is 45-degree lighting. I think in previous conversations, Maya said like, you know, short lighting. So basically when the shadow side of your subject is closer to your camera than the light side is. So in this case, if you kind of draw an imaginary line between the camera to the subject and the subject to the sun where it is, it creates like a 45-degree angle. That's why I call it 45-degree light. And the reason why I like this light is because it gives a nice balance between kind of like contrast and then flattering, because you don't want to accentuate too much of the texture of the skin, too much of these, unless that's what you're going for. Most of the time when I photograph my family or with paid clients, they're looking for kind of like this balanced look, so they don't look flat, but they also don't like super textured in their skin and stuff like that. So I find that this is the best way to approach it for me. And if you're trying to figure out when is a good time for this kind of lighting opportunities to happen, it usually happens within like 2 to 3 hours after sunrise and 2 to 3 hours before sunset. That's when the lighting is very low. It also creates like close to a 45-degree angle between the angle to the sun and to the level, you know, surface of the earth. So it's 45 degrees in all, you know, both the vertical axis and like the flat axis between you and the camera.
Reggie, this might be a silly question, but can you only take use of using directional light when it's sunny outside? So for instance, if it was cloudy, would a lot of the stuff or these tricks not work?
They actually still do work, and you'll actually notice them a lot. So what doesn't happen in like a cloudy day is the softness, like the quality of light is a little bit softer. So the shadows are going to be more blurred out, but the direction is always there. And I think that's one thing that I noticed between a very experienced photographer and one that's not quite, is that they see the clouds and like, oh yay, there's clouds, but you can still have raccoon eyes, you can still have side lighting happening when it's cloudy. It's just the shadows are a little bit blurred, so it's harder to see. One way that I try to find the light is I still just put out my hand and like move it in relation to light, and you can see the shadows change. And that's how you can identify it too. Or you can just look up at the sky and it's like, where is the sun? And orient yourself that way.
Nice, thank you.
Yep. So now let's move on to composition. And I think, oh no, this is a backlight. Sorry. Okay, there's one more. So for backlighting, this is probably the last type of occurrence thing that I look for a lot. And I like to be a little bit more heavy-handed with it because I try to bring it to a silhouette most of the time when I have a backlit situation. And in this case, there's a window behind and my kids are there, and I underexpose the photo for the silhouette to really highlight the profile of their faces. And I actually have different photos of them where I just took them solo, and I've done different versions where I can actually see their profiles progress as they get older. Their faces are not as round; they get a little bit more slimmed down. The hair is different, so it's a cool thing to just do over time as well. If you have a repeating subject that you always photograph. Um, but yeah, the backlighting situations are very fun to do, and it really creates this dramatic look to a very ordinary occurrence. Again, kids are watching TV; they're just standing up and watching TV, and it's a very compelling image that building this skill at home, I've been able to create brand awareness for my photography brand because I do these very epic silhouettes um, that people know me by. So cool. So now we're going into composition, and I think because I'm an engineer from the past, I really lean into like the geometry of all the composition. So I like to look around in my surroundings and observe what shapes are naturally there, I also look for lines and framing my intended subject within the shape or using the lines to draw the viewer to the subject. And there's also the option of using the shapes as the subject of your photo itself. And I think that's a really cool thing to dive into. So first, we're gonna look at this photo that has a frame within a frame. So people say frame within a frame. Some people call it natural framing, subframing. Like there's different ways to call it, but basically it's having some type of shape or element to kind of frame and border your subject so that the subject has a point of reference in another shape. And in the next slide, you'll see an overlay of the two different rectangles that I used to frame this photo. Down the hallway at the end, there's a border where the hallway ends, which creates a smaller rectangle that I kind of frame my wife within the center of. And then the border between this light from the skylight to the shadow where it doesn't show anymore creates this like secondary rectangle where I actually try to line up my kids like stepping into that specific point. So they're kind of like standing on top of the rectangle. So this is something that you can do if you notice these types of shapes in your environment and you have someone either walking or there's passersby. You can literally just wait and kind of like a fisherman, like wait till people kind of step into your composition, and that's a cool way to kind of play with this frame within a frame technique. Yeah, like a trap. And now moving on to leading lines. So leading lines is basically if you find any type of border or edge within your environment, or if there's literally like a painted line on a wall or something like that, you can use these lines to your advantage to point across to your subject or just create a flow for the viewer to scan your photo in a specific way. I like to center my photos a lot, so that ends up making like two leading lines that kind of go together. And whenever you're in a hallway or a like an aisle or a room, it ends up making everything converge, especially if you get down a little bit low or get a little bit higher, it'll kind of make them all converge together. And in this next slide, you can see kind of like an overlay of how that's working. And my philosophy when it comes to composition is to make the photo make sense very quickly at a quick glance. Because of the leading lines, as opposed to some people have the approach of like they want people to explore the photo and not know where to look. I like to make it very impactful right away because I think my perspective is really with this kind of like simplicity. So that's how I use leading lines in a lot of my compositions. Yeah, Maya said these are very cinematic. Thank you for the the compliment on that. And so for this last one, it is thinking about using shapes as the subject of your photo. Maybe you don't have people around you to photograph. Maybe you're alone. Maybe you're on your commute to work or walking. You're by yourself. What do you do? This is a place that I actually drive by every single day to get out of my neighborhood, and I usually just don't pay any attention to it. I'm just on my way to do something else. I got to get gas. I got to go to this shoot, something like that. One of these days, I was off by myself, just wanted to go on a photo walk, and I stopped and I just parked here and just explored this place a little bit. And I came across this composition where I wanted to use the two garage doors as the subject of the photo. They kind of like mirrored each other, but also not quite of a mirror because of the little white door on the left. And you can see the overlay on the next slide where I kind of centered it so that this little red stripe in the middle is kind of in between both of them, and then we have the door. And it's, you know, these are kind of like reminiscent of like those abstract paintings that people just did with shapes. Like you can do that with photography, just with the colors and the shapes. And also it's just an exercise in being able to understand that you can create anywhere. You don't have to. Some people said they don't have time, they have a job. When you're at work and you have a break or something like that, or even in your office or wherever you work, you can try and find and pinpoint these different shapes so that you can start putting them together with colors and light to make something cool. It could be abstract, it could be very straightforward like this. You know exactly what this is. This is a garage. But the way that I combine them is still kind of a creative expression of how I saw this space. Cool. So now we get onto what I call like the analog spirit. And I think the one thing about film is that it kind of brings us to a point where we're kind of like forgetting about the camera and thinking more about like the medium of photography. And I understand that film has its own things about, you know, the actual film itself, but I think we can carry the spirit of film to digital photography if you are kind of using like these film presets or just kind of digging into that type of aesthetic, because using the film emulations, you can kind of remove the digital evidence. You can get that edge off. You can add a sense of fade and warmth to it so that it looks a little bit more timeless because you can't pinpoint where it is. And oops, that's okay. And I think that's a really cool thing to do, because you can take these moments and start making them a little bit more timeless. And I think the cool thing is you can use your phone. It doesn't have to be a film camera, because we already demoed that right at the beginning. So in this next slide, you'll see two different images. They're just taken with my phone, that are really emulating that film. You can go as heavy-handed. Like the one on the right has a lot of fade in the shadows. And the one on the left, I'm using like the KP800, which is the film that you would probably use in a night situation as opposed to 400. And being able to kind of emulate that and realizing that you guys, when you answered the poll, you got it wrong, right? So being able to trick people into thinking you're photographing with film is possible using the VSCO X film preset. So
Thank you so much, Reggie. This was amazing. Please, if you have any other questions, you can share it with us offline around the VSCO sphere. We're always here. If you want to see more of Reggie too, let us know. We had a blast with him today. We hope you all did too. And if you have any other questions that you need to share with me, please let me know. My email is maya@visco.co. I have a feeling there's a few questions we might have missed. So if there's anything you need, let us know. But Reggie, thank you so much. Kyle, thank you so much. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we say goodbye to everyone?
no, I think everyone just make sure you keep making photographs. That's the lesson of today is, even if you're not inspired, just make something real quick and see where it takes you. If you can do that, then I've done my job. So
Right, right. Thank you so much, everybody. We hope
course.
you enjoy your weekend, and I hope to see some more creations from you all after this event.
Awesome.
Bye.
See
Thank you for
everyone.
coming, everyone.